is an exciting day.
Sorry.
Today is an exciting day, so let's have a cheer. Hooray!
Yay.
So I'll tell you why it's an exciting day. Exciting day because the next book come out today, and I got this actually since I spoke to Emma this morning. So this came in the post. So this book is I only really wrote one chapter in it, so it's called Why Bother? Why and How to Assess Your Continuous Improvement Culture. So this is very much about some of the behavioral side of things. And I think in this network, we had a session from ST some months ago. There's a chapter on the ST approach in the Indian site and the Singapore site on the behavioral deployment. So this is in this book here. Anyway, I'm excited. I don't know if you're excited, but I'm excited. It's not often you get a book out, but anyway, here we go. So, oh, we have Stephen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Hello.
Okay. Hi. So I'm sorry now. I had issues connecting to the sound for some reason. Yes, I'm Stephen McDermott. I work in Abbott in Longford with Joanne. Like Joanne said, I'm actually studying my master's as well in Lean as well. So hoping to get something out for college as well. So.
Very good, very good. I'm not allowed to make any rude comments about Limerick being associated with Waterford. You know, I can't. I'm not allowed to do things like that, am I? So let's press on. So I'm going to share my screen, and we will. Let's see. Share my screen. Share screen. Right. Did that come up? Can you see that? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So I think it's a matter of switching between Zoom and Teams, and one does a red thing around the outside and one doesn't, and I was a bit confused. Anyway, good. So what we've got is I've got a couple of little inputs, and then we'll have a little conversation workshop in the middle, if that's okay, and maybe have a quick 5-minute break for a cup of tea. So this is the agenda. So basically the first session for about half an hour, I'm going to look at the psychology of Lean, and what you'll see is it's not as good as it might be. And probably all of us over the years have wondered why it's hard to engage people, and it's hard to keep them engaged, and always to create that sustainability. You know, even if we're doing a really good program of work, sometimes these things can slip away. And I suppose over the years, that's what I've seen with many organizations. So over about the last 6 months, I took the time to really go and look at some of the psychology, particularly the positive psychology literature, and try and think about that in the context of what we're doing in Lean and enterprise excellence. And I was really quite shocked when I looked at it through this lens of what we do, and there's a lot of things that don't necessarily add up. So there's a few implications. So I'd like to go through that, and then maybe get you to think a little bit about, you know, psychological perspective on some of the work that you do in your sort of Lean work and so forth. And then the last session of the day, I could literally give you 3 days on this, of what you could do about it. But I thought I'd just give you a fairly high level what you could do about it, and some of the pilot research that I'm actually doing with a few companies on that, to just give you a little insight. Is that okay? Are we good?
Sounds good.
Good. Okay. So some of these first slides, many of you may have seen them before or something similar, but I think they're good as an introduction. So probably over the last, I don't know, 10 years or something like that, certainly those of you like Joanne that have seen some of the courses and so forth, a lot of the work has been trying to integrate some of what we're doing in the various improvement. Now, whether we call it Lean or Six Sigma or Agile or Operational Excellence, you know, okay, we can debate the differences, but they're all sort of within an area. And probably often the differences are, where do we come from? So maybe lean is coming from engineering and quality, gives us Six Sigma, and ICT maybe gives us agile. So one of the differences is probably that sort of background. But the bigger issue is, how do we close this bridge with this sort of people side of things on the other side? This sort of respect for people, cultural change, leadership development, all the sort of stuff that perhaps colleagues in the HR or people side are looking at. And if you take the Toyota terminology, you've got continuous improvement on one side, which is probably most of the stuff we're familiar with, and then this respect for people. So I ran a session on this in this group. I think it was probably about a year ago, so I'm not sure whether any of you are here, looking at this sort of concept of the people value stream. So the idea of this is that if we think of what we're mostly doing in improvement, we're mostly focusing on this product value stream, and obviously value stream mapping, all the sort of tools we're familiar with. But really what we're trying to do here is saying, what if we're trying to improve and develop and become better as an organization? Maybe we need to do the same sort of thinking with people in the organization. So developing people, the growth and development of people. So if we put that into like a sort of simple cartoon of a value stream map, we could say that the customer is the line manager, and then the equivalent of production control are the various elements of HR, which are usually subdivided into these different sub-functions. Obviously, different companies give them different names. And then we make or buy in people or training courses. So we either hire ourselves, or we get agencies to help us. We run courses ourselves, or we get training organizations to help us. And then the problem being at the moment, because we're sort of managing these people a little bit by the line manager, but the line managers maybe don't really see it's their role perhaps very much. Maybe it's partly from HR. But the problem is that what we do in the recruitment might be different from the induction. We might recruit according to a set of skills, and then the first thing, people come in and we start talking about values and behavior, and hence people may be not sure. And for the individual, it doesn't really feel like a flow. It feels a little bit like I'm being passed around, and no one's particularly focusing on me and my development as much as I might be. Is this sounding familiar to anyone? Anyone have this sort of experience? Everyone's gone very quiet.
I'm sure that people would relate to this, yeah, in different elements.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
And depending what department you're in as well, I think where you work, it would impact it.
Yeah, obviously it depends on the role. So I'm sort of caricaturing a sort of worst case a little bit sort of in this. So the result of that is that maybe the value adding for the individual is a little bit lower than it might be. So this 45% actually came out of some past research, which I did with some accounting friends of mine. And 4 years, I just made up a number. But the point being that the value adding for people is low. Their motivation and engagement might be not as high as it might be. And actually they might be leaving. They might be looking for new roles, etc. So that's sort of a current state of this. And we started to think about this in terms of what this might look like. And hence what this might look like is, obviously we still got the line manager, but in fact, the line manager, instead of looking for the usual sort of quality cost delivery, might have more focus in the KPIs or KBIs in terms of some of these more people orientated things. Because if we improve the people, if we improve the motivation, we improve the development of people, the growth of people, then actually they can give more. They can maybe have a higher value adding ratio. Maybe they'll stay longer, and maybe we need to rethink what HR looks like, and it's more focusing on sort of people and culture, and hence we might be looking at different types of things, like focusing on behaviors, much more coaching and development of line managers, for example. And for the individual, when they come in, we might be much more trying to focus on these flows of their lifetime learning and development, their lifetime development of behaviors, their ability to coach and provide social support or receive this, their community inclusion, for instance, the lunchtime groups that might be non-work, but actually might be quite motivational for people in terms of their role, and mental and physical well-being. So that's the sort of flows. So what you can see in this sort of future or ideal state is trying to take some of the lean principles of pull and flow that we might be doing in the product value stream and take this into this people value stream. So I'm going to stop there and just see if that's making sense to people. How are we doing on that? Have I lost you, or are you still with me?
I mean, that
No, it sounds good.
That would be aligned with a lot of the Shingo principles, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. In fact, I was actually just having a conversation with Ken Snyder about this yesterday, which would be very much in line with the Shingo approach, respecting every individual, leading with humility. This is absolutely about respecting every individual. And actually the key word there is every individual, because we need to do this for every individual. And hence this is a way of helping the individual to understand what's meaningful for them, and then be able to listen to what they require so that the organization and the line management can provide support. So it's very much aligned with that sort of Shingo approach. Okay.
So Peter, in
Yeah.
this model, the supplier, that's the person on the factory floor, is it?
Well, supplier would be the supply of people or the supply of training. So in this sense, the supplier would be who's providing new people or providing the training and development of people. Okay. So obviously that could be internal or it could be an external role, etc. But I think in principle, what we're moving towards is a fuller role for the direct line manager here than perhaps has been done in the past. Yeah. Okay, so that was sort of more by way of background, and if you hadn't had the earlier session. So this idea of flow is obviously, I think all of us coming from a sort of lean background, we'd be familiar with the idea of flow and pull and so forth. But actually, if you start thinking about psychology here, there's a very good book called Flow, the Psychology of Optimum Experience. And this is by this gentleman, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. That was a bit of a task to getting that one through. But this book is really about personal happiness or well-being for the individual. It's not really designed to be in a work sense at all. It's really designed to be in your personal life, etc. But what he talks about is actually quite applicable to the workplace. So what he's saying is that on this axis, people are ready or able to take on greater levels of responsibility. So here I'm ready to do photocopying or something. Here I feel ready or able to be the CEO. And this axis is to what degree, in this business sense, is the organization giving me responsibility. So here, the bottom, please go and do some photocopying, and up here it's please be the CEO or the factory manager or something. And what he talks about is that for many people, and particularly if you think about in an organization, particularly lower down in the organization, a lot of people might be ready or able to give more, but actually we're not providing them the environment to be able to do that. On the other axis, this is the sort of zone of over promotion. If you can't get that concept, think of your boss, and then you'll probably be fine on that one. And promoted to a point of where they're really struggling with their ability. And then you often see some senior managers up here, and you often see some middle managers in this sort of comfort zone. In other words, doing a reasonable job, but sort of well within themselves. They could do more, but they're not really being stretched. They're not really given the opportunity to perhaps develop. And the idea of flow here in the psychological sense is that people move along their lifetime, or in this case, their career in a job, just outside what they're capable with, but we're actually providing something more like a servant leadership environment where we're giving that coaching, that development, very much helping the people to go forward. So that's the idea of flow. So the idea of flow that we're trying to capture in this thinking is a combination of the lean flow, you know, without disruptions and delay, and getting to your destination as soon as possible, a short lead time, if you like, as well as this psychological flow. So I guess we're probably all familiar with, you know, sometimes we use the phrase, someone's in the flow or in the zone. In other words, that they're completely focused on something and highly motivated. So you could think of, you know, maybe at home you're with a computer game, or you're in binge watching a TV series, or reading a book and you can't put it down. That's the sort of idea of this flow. So hence, in this context, how could we create flow in the psychological sense of, in effect, very high levels of engagement and motivation? Are we okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So if we look at some of the probably more well-known theories of psychology or organizational behavior, those of you that are doing masters or whatever, you may well have come across some of the things like Hertzberg. And Hertzberg, as you can see, this work's 50 years old, but Hertzberg basically says there's various things that we could be satisfied around. For instance, we've achieved things, we're recognized, we're motivated by the work itself. But there's sort of things that dissatisfy us. And what satisfies us isn't necessarily the opposite of what dissatisfies us. So the sort of things that dissatisfy us might be, you know, bureaucratic procedures, supervisors that perhaps we don't get on with, maybe relationships with other people in the organization. So if what we're trying to do by focusing on this value stream is actually improve and develop and grow people, and hence, for the organization's point of view, improve the motivation, so that we can get discretionary effort and extra, we've actually got to do these things that make people satisfied and motivated, and we've got to get rid of these things that dissatisfy people. And I guess some of you have come across Maslow's hierarchy. Is that familiar? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite well known if you've done, you know, some management training. One of the interesting things I found, I mean, I first came across that in the late 80s when I did my own MBA, but actually there's a more useful model than Maslow's hierarchy, which came out in, I think, the 50s or 60s, is this later work that he did, which is what he calls his motivational model. And what you see, if you're familiar with the five areas of the pyramid of Maslow, these first four, these are all the bottom four of the four levels. And in this later work, he called these deficiency needs. In other words, they're a little bit like this sort of these brown areas, or we could call them hygiene factors. In other words, unless you're feeling that you're safe and you've got paid enough to be able to live, and you know people are looking after you a little bit, you're not going to move on and try and achieve some of these higher growth needs. And what we're saying here is, if you want people to grow and develop, we've got to get rid of, we've got to create an environment where they're not bothered by the stuff down here, which may be around, say, HR policies and leadership style. But actually, we've got to do a whole lot more focus on how do we get them into this growth environment. So in the original Maslow work, the self-actualization was the highest level. So in other words, what he was saying was that people are doing it for the self-motivation of doing it. I'm doing this because I'm going to feel really good. I'm going to feel I've achieved things, etc., which is absolutely right. But actually what he later says is that some people might have cognitive needs. So for instance, Stephen and Joanne, you may well be doing your course at UL, not necessarily purely because of the job, but you have a cognitive need in terms of, I want to learn some stuff, I want to improve myself and develop. So it's about your sort of, you know, your own intrinsic needs and so forth. And we might have needs for aesthetic. So, you know, that's where we've got, I don't know, flowers on our desk or pictures of the family or something like that, because we're looking for more out of life than just making money. We actually want to live in a nice environment. And transcendence is the very highest level. So that almost gets into sort of very deep-seated, maybe even religious beliefs or something like that, a very, very high level, etc. So that's some of the traditional stuff. There's Hertzberg, there's McGregor. You might be familiar with, McGregor, theory X, theory Y. I won't go more into that, but what this is setting the scene for is there's probably this sort of two levels. There's the avoid the problems with, otherwise people are not really happy, and move on and gain some of this stuff that will really, really get them motivated. So more recently, probably in the last sort of 15 years, if we look at the psychology literature, previous to this, most psychology was either clinical psychology, which tended to be quite negative in perspective, or it was sort of educational psychology about learning and education. And in the last, 15 years, there's been much more on what we could call positive psychology. So positive psychology, if you link that to some of this earlier work, is much more around this top level. So how do we achieve these really positive things that will be highly motivational for people? So we achieve these blue areas, and actually we can get people to flow in this model. So positive psychology, we could say, this is a definition from Peterson, positive psychology is the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. So if I was to say for you, what would be the thing that you might be passionate about? And you could tell me something, and it might be work related, it might not be work related, but actually it's sort of what makes you tick, if you like, what really makes what makes life good for you. So it might be walks in the country, or being with your family, or etc. So probably the most useful piece of work here in this is work by these two gentlemen here, Ryan and Dechy. In fact, the picture at the bottom is Dechy and Ryan, but it's usually called Ryan and Dechy, who are two professors from Rochester University in the States. Have any of you come across the work of Dan Pink?
No.
No? Okay, well, if you're not familiar with Dan Pink, don't worry about it, because Dan Pink basically stole their work really and popularized it. So if you're not familiar with it, so
We'll stay away from him.
So this Ryan and Dechy stuff really makes some sense and really resonated with me. And what they're saying is there's three really important things that people are seeking. Now, obviously, to what degree each of us is seeking will depend a little bit, and you could say you're higher or lower on the scale, but most of us are after these three things in our life and in our job, etc. So the first of these is autonomy. So in other words, we all really want to do things in our own way. We want to be able to make our own decisions. We want to go our own direction. We don't want to be told what to do. We don't want to really be having an over bureaucratic environment. We want to sort of self-guided, freedom, if you like. So that's the first, and that was actually the most important one of this, the autonomy of people. The second one was around competence. So we all strive to be good at something. Now, good at something could be inside of work, or it could be outside of work, but actually this competence could be around, achieving, a black belt, It could be around being the best person on the site at TPM, or coding, or whatever it might be. Or it could be, you know, flower arranging, or chef, or, you know, something that might be outside of work. And the third of these is relatedness. Relatedness basically being, this is about human belonging. So this could be belonging in the sense of in a family, belonging in terms of a team you might be working in, or belonging for a whole company or something. So in other words, you feel sort of part of the family in however you define the family. So these were the three most important things that he found people were actually looking for. Okay, so if we think about, you know, what we've done in lean or enterprise excellence, and if we think about autonomy, competence, and relatedness, this is where the sort of I got to start thinking that you know, what we do in lean is not necessarily 100% good. And so obviously I've only just captured a few things, not everything in here, but if we think about how we run the organization, and we've all got a strategy deployment or Hoshin planning or whatever we want to call it, but in principle, it's mostly a top-down system. We might have some catchball and so forth, but it's mostly, what does the organization need? What's good for them? How are we going to be successful as an organization? And how can we respond to that? So it's mostly coming down. It's very little about what do I as an individual want? What's going to motivate me? What's going to make me happy? And how does the organization adjust to me? There's very little of that focus. The second one is standard work. Now, clearly, if we have an extreme standard work situation, there might be very limited amount of freedom for people to be autonomous, although they may be in sort of team meetings and things like that. But very much, you know, this is the best way to do it. But obviously, if we've got bottom-up ideas and we're brainstorming improvement in huddles and so forth, that could be some good autonomy. So as you can see, it's mixed. In terms of competency, often competency systems are developed by HR or by corporate. These are the courses. If you want to get to this position, you do this course or this course. And sometimes it feels as if individuals don't have a lot of choice in the process, and maybe we all find ourselves doing courses that we're maybe not sure are the right course. And relatedness, clearly there's many areas where we can have relatedness or belonging in terms of, for instance, team-based problem solving, or being part of a lunchtime group or something like that. But in terms of, you know, what the business is focusing on, it's mostly focusing on your job. So if you have your personal development plan or whatever it is, you know, once a year conversation, it's almost solely about the job itself. So how do you get better at doing the job? It's not necessarily how do you become a better person? How do you become greater levels of wellness, in other words? So the answer to here is, when I started reflecting on some of the things that we do in lean, I could say it's mixed. And probably you could say that the more advanced you are with lean, probably the slightly better it gets when you've got more coaching and kata and Gemba walks, etc. And the more basic lean you do, which is, here's a course, get on with it, here's a black belt project you're going to be in, you're going to be told what to do, etc., might not be quite so positive. So that was the sort of reflection that I had. How are we doing on time? I think we are about on time here. So I'm gonna stop there. Maybe we're just I'll just come off the slides for a second. So I don't know if there's any questions at that point before we sort of go into little conversations.
I just query, Peter, and actually it was on one of the slides you had there. There seemed to be some, you know, you had recognition was kind of the second highest in terms of being a positive, but it
Yeah.
was also quite high in terms of being a distractor. And I was just, is there a contradiction there, or how do you
Yeah.
interpret some of that?
Let me just put the slide up. So this was the Hertzberg thing. Yeah, it sort of had both. I mean, what I think Hertzberg was saying here is that it could cause satisfaction for people, but the absence of it could cause dissatisfaction for people. So that's really what he was saying. So it could be both. So as I sort of said, well, mostly they're one or the other. I think that example is the positive and the negative of the same thing are the flip side of each other. So that probably actually reinforces, it gets rid of a negative and it creates a positive if we do recognition well. And I think, Michael, you've got some very good examples of recognition at your side.
Well, I mean, we try and certainly do recognition, but I guess there's always opportunity for improvement and being able to do more. But it's certainly something that we probably have looked to focus on.
Right. Well, part of the second part is what we could do more. So I've got one or two ideas and thoughts that might help on that one.
Okay.
But I'll save my thunder for later on. Okay.
Well, that's okay.
Any other? I see we've got Linda and Sean have joined us now. Oh, and
Yeah.
another Daniel.
And we also have Daniel Frey as well.
Do you guys want to say hello?
Hi all, this is Sean. How are you? See, can I get my camera on? How are you on?
Hi, Sean.
I'm from Abbott Diagnostics, and yeah, I just mine built to join for the whole lot, so dip in and dip out, Peter, if that's okay.
Grand. Linda, you there? She's got to be incognito. Not to worry. We'll move on. So, any other questions or comments at that point? No. Okay. Let's do a little bit of workshopy stuff, shall we? Let me just share my screen again. Okay. Okay. So what I'd like you to think about, so how many people, should we have a couple of groups, Emma?
Yes, so we have 2 groups
Okay, good.
of 5.
So what I'd like you to do is to think about what we're doing in terms of lean or enterprise excellence, and try and think about some examples that are psychologically positive. So what is creating a positive environment, which is around, you know, things like this recognition, development, positive psychology, as opposed to, and what might be some of the things that we're doing that might feel a little bit negative. So for instance, being told what to do, or having people come and do an improvement in your area if you're not involved in it, and then it all gets changed for you, might be rather more negative. And then if you could have a think about what might you do to create a bit more psychologically positive environment. Is that okay? We have a think about that. So we've got let's say 10 minutes in the 2 groups, and then maybe one person from each group could give us a bit of a summary of what you've found. Is that okay?
Yeah. So if it's easier, I can just assign the sort of team leaders just to make notes in your group.
Okay.
So in group 1, if we go with Daniel Enns, if that's okay, to be the team leader, just to feedback what your group's spoken about. And then in group 2, Joanne Hone, if that's okay. Okay, great. So I will see you in 10 minutes. Any questions?
So the topic, firstly, what's positive psychologically in the work, what's not positive or negative, and what might you do to make it more positive is things I'd like you to think about. Okay. Okay, 10 minutes.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, thanks,
Yep.
guys. See you in a bit. Right. Oh, right. Oh, everyone's back.
People are coming back now. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. Good. Let's hear what you've found out. So, room 1, was that you, Daniel?
Yes.
So we'll get someone who doesn't speak English as their first language to be the miking the notes. Is that a good idea?
That's fine.
Okay. What did you talk about?
Sometimes I struggle through some difficult words, but I think it will
Okay.
be okay. We had, for the first point, we said that it's what we do is to give the people recognition, to make sure that they feel recognized and celebrated and seen with what they're doing.
Yeah.
And to provide the right, like, the people development, give them the right training and make them feel also that they can develop themselves in some way.
Yeah.
And also like some basic points, like as a company or as leaders, as the management, being humble and reflect, and a good management style.
Okay. Yeah. So the sort of servant leadership type management style.
Yeah. And as a negative is that we, of course, we don't do the positive things, and or we do them just as a show. We just do them to make a tick mark. And I have an example from our company that Kaizen meetings is something mandatory and often feels to the people as a top-down forced thing.
Right. So hence the autonomy is not there because they have to be there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They have to be there, and it doesn't feel something that it's coming from themselves, or not value the ideas of the people. And then we run out a bit of time, but we had a very quick summary of a few points. What can we do better? Which is the most important point.
Yeah.
Is just to have an inclusive culture, that to have feedback loops also in the processes and the standard works, to make sure that the people can have the feeling that they contribute something to what's
I think
changed.
the point of, we might have to have standard work, but if the people are the larger player in improving the standard work, and it's maybe signed off by management or engineering rather than it's done by management engineering, I think that would be definitely a good point. Yeah,
I like the way you phrase it. And education on the benefits. That was another point.
Very good.
Did I miss something? Group?
No,
I think you covered them.
you covered everything. Yeah.
All right,
good.
thanks.
Okay, Joanne.
Okay,
Group 2.
so we looked at psychologically positive. So we said, if you have a creative environment, if people are thinking, and you have a Kaizen, a strong environment where they're submitting ideas, and their ideas are heard, and their ideas are valued and implemented, that can always be very, very positive. And given the power and the resources to implement them, that people aren't just putting in ideas and they're going nowhere. Also that, if you are doing projects and working in different areas, especially for yellow belts and green belts, that, there's respect shown for the people in the areas, that they're not going in making changes without the buy-in and the input from the area SMEs and the people working on the floor. That, a lot of people are afraid of change. So, by having strong communication and engagement, you create a psychologically strong and positive environment. And then on the negative, they said, if you don't do all of that, you're going to have a very negative environment. And one of the negatives is, you know, Kaizen ideas, pressure on people to hit a metric for ideas. You have to have 10 ideas a month, and
Right.
you're coming up with ideas just to hit a metric, as opposed to, it's nearly disrespectful for them that, will it even get implemented? They just
Right.
want an idea to hit a metric. So
that's
that
very
can be-
much similar to Daniel's thing. You have to be at the meeting, you have to have 10 ideas. So
Yeah.
you're going to end up putting silly ideas in, aren't you? Just to
wasting
hit a
everybody's
metric.
time.
Yeah.
To hit a metric.
Yeah.
So that can be very negative. And then another negative we found is it's all these ideas come in, and the leaders are like under pressure to come up with ideas and make a lot of change, and then they're taking on more than they can chew, and there's a lot of
Right.
stress in the area for resources. So people leveling management and resource leveling. If there's poor leadership, that can really have a negative impact on the people. It's stress for everybody. So that was those things. And then what can we do to create a more positive environment? Well, Mark gave a very good example of in his organisation where they really showed engagement for their people, where they revamped the canteen and put in pool tables and games tables, and the company was not going to benefit from a kit cost per kit or anything like that, but it for morale, people felt valued, that they were given something to them, so they go down to the canteen. I think there was alcohol-free beer and pizzas and stuff like that. So it just stuff like that.
What was that context? Alcohol-free beer. I'm not sure I understand what that is.
Oh, I know a lot about it. And they did. We also mentioned people development and training is huge for creating a positive culture.
Yeah.
Believing in your people.
Okay, grand. So we've got lots of good thoughts and so forth. Great. So I'm going to move on to the second part, and here there's a whole load of stuff. We could go on days and days, and Emma knows I can go on for days and days on this topic. But I'm going to share just a few thoughts with you. And if I can find the presentation, oops, somehow I can't see it. Oh, there we go. Is that up? Yes? Yeah? Okay, yeah, good. Yeah. So I'm going to share a few thoughts with you. And this is where we start getting a little bit wacky and a little bit radical. And I suppose a starting point for this is actually, I came across this book. I don't know if you can see this. It's called Self-Help by this guy, Samuel Smiles. Anyone come across this book? No? No one? Sean, you come across this?
No, I haven't.
No,
I haven't
no.
seen it, Peter, no.
Well, the interesting thing is this book is credited with being the most influential book behind the Toyota company. This was actually read by Sakichi Toyoda, who was the founder of Toyota and then Toyota. And actually, it's credited with why they went into the loom industry, because the case studies in this book include the loom industry, they include steam engines. This book is from 1866, and this book in the 1860, 1870 sold over 1 million copies in Japan. So this was like the best-selling book in Japan, and it's basically around this concept of self-help or self-resilience. So it's really at the heart of in Toyota, when we talk about that respect for people thing, what it really translates as respect for humanity or respect for humankind. And really what it's saying is that to respect people, we've got to create the environment where they can thrive, but they've actually got to do it themselves. So in other words, it's not spoon feeding them. They've actually got to create this self-reliance themselves. And that is at the heart of what this Toyota sort of approach is. So if you want an interesting history book where the case studies are all the sort of European industrial revolution companies, that book, and if you go to the Toyota Museum, this is one of the, it's in a glass case as a sort of key book in the museum for the history. And So I suppose if we take that sort of thinking, which is actually behind the Toyota stuff, although we hear about the Toyota production system, which is obviously the operating system, we don't hear about this human side. This is sort of turning the organization upside down. So obviously, we've probably seen slides a little bit like this before. I think John Shook has one. I'm sure, you know, Mark, Sean, you've got some version of a slide like this in your armory somewhere. But what we tended to do is we've tended to think about the change in leadership. So we've got to move from a command and control where the autonomy sits with the leaders and then we tell people what to do, to a point where the autonomy sits with the people and we support them. And what we've tended to do is we've worked on the leadership side. If we changed how we lead, in other words, we lead by asking questions, we lead by coaching, etc., which is all fantastic. But actually what came to me in my brain when I was thinking about this is that what we've effectively done is we've moved from being a parent as a leader to being an adult. So in other words, we're looking for an adult to adult conversation with someone to coach them. What do you need coaching in? How can I help you? What support do you need? The problem being is that we've trained people to be like children on the left-hand side, to be spoon-fed, to be told what to do, etc. And actually what we've got to do, as well as moving from parent to adult as the senior people, we've actually got to work hard for moving people that are, you know, the team member level, particularly, to becoming more like an adult, which actually is this sort of self-reliance stuff. In other words, how do they take greater reliance and accountability of what they're doing? So hence, if you take this is in the Essence of Excellence book, although I've slightly modified this, is saying that if we want to create an environment where we get the best out of people and we want to motivate people and we want to really get, you know, fantastic stuff out of them, if we want to create an effective and sustainable organization, of course we need the voice of the owner. You know, this is what does corporate want in terms of, you know, profit, quality, you know, all the usual stuff. Obviously lean teaches us the voice of the customer, but this is what we could call the voice of the employee and to some degree the voice of society. So in other words, in servant leadership, we talk about listening to our people, but actually, do we have a method of people understanding really what they want? Do we have a method of people really developing themselves? Do we have a method of listening to the voice of the employee? And when I look at that, I think, well, not as well as we could be. So this is what this sort of stuff is about. So this is some metrics from one of these sort of research houses. This one's from the States. And this is talking about, well, what would really engage employees? And what you can see, it's the sort of things that Daniel and Joanne, you were talking about. So, you know, opportunities to learn, managers that are working with me, listening to me, resolving issues, etc. Being able to understand what the strategy is of the organization in a way that's meaningful, recognition. So I don't think there's any great surprises here, but if you think about how good are we at doing this, the answer is maybe not as good as it could be. So this is incredibly busy. I know this slide, and it's incredibly badly drawn. That's because this is the limit of my drawing ability. So this one hasn't nicely been drawn up. So this is a sort of work in progress, more detail on that people value stream than what I showed you earlier. So just to show you a little bit. So what we're going to focus on now is this: how do we create this self-reliance and meaning for the individual? And hence, how do we help them flow? I'm not going to go into detail on what the flows are. And hence, what do we need to do in the HR community, or what we might call people and culture, to be able to support this? And what do we need to do in terms of leadership to make all of this happen? Which is much going down this sort of servant leadership stuff, although I think we've got to change how we measure, particularly at the team level, to be much more focused on this people value stream than just focusing on the product value stream. But I'm going to focus on this first bit of starting with the individual. And what I'm going to introduce to you is the idea of turning the organization upside down and thinking, this is almost saying, let's think about the Hoshin process in reverse. So let's start to think about, instead of the owner being the shareholders, but the owner being the individual. If we're trying to create motivation, engagement, higher performance from the individual, let's think about them. Let's think, what do they need and how can the organization actually support that? So this bit is a bit more going deep into the psychology thing that I mentioned earlier. So I'm not going to get lost too much in this. The top part of this, from the term autonomy upwards, is from Ryan and Decci. And you can see as you go further along their 6-point model, you go from traditional command and control organizations, which are highly motivational for you do this or you'll get sacked type of thing, to the lean organization where perhaps psychologically not so good in the early stages, but psychologically more positive when they're doing some of the things that Daniel and Joanne, you were sharing with me. But actually going even further than that into this sort of people value stream organization, which is a bit like this motivation on steroids. So what they're saying here is that there's 2 types of motivation that we really need to help people with. So the first of these is actually things that they might all be intrinsically motivated by anyway. So if I said to you, Stephen, tell me something that you're passionate about, and not particularly about work, but just in your own life.
Unfortunately, I'll have to say Manchester United, which is probably not a bad thing at the minute to be saying, but yeah, probably that. Yeah.
Okay, I was hoping it would be something to do with football, but you know, we can't have everything. Okay, well, I have to say they did well last night to come back like they did.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
I did well last night to come back like they did.
My team, of course, did 4-0, but that's another story. Okay, so the point is, we might all have something in life that we're intrinsically motivated in. It might be completely dissociated with the work, but it might be to some degree related to the work, or could be related to the work. So for instance, if there was a Man U supporters club in your site, Stephen, and you could meet once a week on a Friday and you talk about what was going to happen on a Saturday, that might be something that'd be highly motivating for you, not just for that half an hour you might be meeting, but that might buoy you up in a wider sense than that. So that would be taking things that we're all individually motivated with, and it might be work or not. The other side, which is this 5th level, is it's the extrinsic motivation. In other words, it's motivation that's coming not from us, but from outside, in this case, the work, but internalizing that to be motivational for the individual. So this is where we often give, the town hall speeches, which actually we know sometimes don't really motivate people because people can't make sense of them in their own right. So I'll give you a simple example, just by way to illustrate. So I'm a member of a golf club, and in the golf club, anyone play golf? Any golfers here? No. Okay. In the golf club, they're passionate about 2 things. 2 things matter, which is effectively their KPIs. So one is beating other clubs in their golf competitions. They're always passionate about that. And if one of these golf competitions comes past, you have to get out the way of them, which I always find extremely annoying. And then the other thing is your handicap. So everyone's talking about, my handicap's 15 and it was 16 last year and I've done da-da-da-da. So that's the 2 things that are, if you like, the corporate KPIs. For me and my son, we've got no interest in doing competitions at all. And the more they go on about competitions, the less engaged we get because we just hate it. And we've got no interest in our handicap, absolutely meaningless to us. But what we do like to do is to write down our golf scores, take them home, type them into our Excel spreadsheet. I can see you're looking at me as if I'm completely sad here at this point. I mean, it's almost as bad as being a Man U fan, isn't it? This, this revelation. And then, you know, we'll look at this and we'll say, how can I improve on hole 3 or hole 7? And how can I get my average down? And what could I do? So actually, for me, the handicap, which is the something that's on the locker room wall, is absolutely meaningless. But my average, which is actually the same thing, but it means something to me and motivates me to do something, is really motivational. So that's what I mean about taking something for the organization and making it really meaningful for the individual. So for example, we could do that by letting individuals work out, I think as you do in Longford there, you know, the teams decide them, how are they going to measure this themselves, which is creating meaning for them. It's not some corporate measure, but actually even going further and let the individual work it out for themselves in their own personal development. Is that okay? Is that making sense? Those two elements. So your own motivation and making sense of the corporate stuff. So, and now we need to think a little bit about, oh,
I couldn't hear what
I'm
you
gonna
said.
take my watch off because it keeps talking to me. So we're going to talk about the brain for a few minutes. So anyone expert on brain science here? I just want to check, because if they're not, I can say anything then. So there's a very interesting book actually by Bruce and Winfrey, and Winfrey is Oprah Winfrey of Oprah Winfrey. So she actually wrote this book with Bruce Perry, who's a doctor, and it's really is about how the brain works. And in the brain, there's basically 4 parts of the brain that do thinking. And if you like, it's a sort of layered thinking from the most instinctive part of the brain. So for instance, if I was picking up this cup of tea and it was boiling hot, I'd just put it down straight away, or I'd drop it, or you put your hand in the fire. It's just an instinctive. So it's, you know, just straight off. And then as you go up the brain, the 3rd level of the brain, I call it the Neanderthal brain, because that's probably about the level it is the limbic brain. And the limbic brain is the feeling or emotional part of the brain. So if you think about, you might be running a Kaizen event and you've got in the team a couple of people that did a Kaizen event before and it was a disaster, or they've got a bad experience of it, or their boss has just shouted at them or something. So they've perhaps had a negative environment. The feeling part of the brain kicks in before you get to the cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. So if you've had a very negative experience, you're not going to be able to persuade that person to take part or engage, however hard you do it, because the emotional response will override. You'll never get to think logically. So you can think about, you know, when you've been very stressed, you know, we all sort of lash out emotionally. We don't necessarily engage the cortex. So that's the limbic. And then the cortex is the smart brain. This is the sort of scientific brain. This is the plan, do, check, act. This is the A3 problem solving brain, which is what we need to engage to do this higher level of thinking. The problem being is maybe 1/3 of people never get to that point with sort of improvement and lean. And hence a lot of this stuff falls flat with them. So the thinking here is we possibly need to think about some improvement cycle that would be beneficial to the individual, could bring forth their internal motivations, could bring forth in an emotionally positive way the internalization of what the business needs, and could engage them so that we actually can get as far as the cortex. So that's the thinking. How do we embrace this feeling brain? So the thinking that we did is we thought, well, maybe what we need is we need the equivalent of plan, do, check, act, but for the limbic brain. So if you think about this, this is a bit like plan, do, check, act. So the plan here, if you translate the words North Star, strategy, formation, and deployment, and think about that for you as an individual. That's what we're doing here. So this is saying, what is meaning for me? In other words, what do I want to achieve? So what is my purpose? So, you know, what was my goal in this organization? Where do I want to be in 5 years' time? Where do I want to get to in my lifetime, for example? And beliefs. So what are my personal beliefs? What am I good at? What am I strong at? What am I passionate about? How can I bring that to bear in my thinking? And bonding that with what does the organization want, but in a way that I can make sense of. So this is basically about creating a really focused strategy for me in the organization. And then flow is basically saying, instead of I get sent on this course this year, that course this year, etc. But how can I actually flow along my career, along these different things about learning new skills, progressing in a role, developing values and behaviors, taking greater responsibility and accountability, participating in community inclusion. So this would be a bit like, you know, the Man United Supporters Club. That might be a community that, you know, Stephen, you'd feel really good at, or you could have an anti-Liverpool club or whatever you want, something like that over there. Did you know there was an ABU club already there, Stephen?
No, I didn't know.
You know what ABU is?
No, go on.
Anyone but United.
I've heard that before, right?
So, and the point is, how could we help people to flow along this in a lean way, quicker, better, without delays, without waste, and so forth. So that's the idea of flow. And then instead of check, it's reflect. So this would be reflecting in a feeling way. So here, this is like Joanne, you were saying, you know, reflecting with recognition. So as I said, some clues on this, how can we increase recognition? Some of that is how can we get people to have increasing recognition of themselves, increasing focus on what they've achieved, increasing that positivity. So here, again, the psychology would suggest that for every thing we need to improve, or let's use the term opportunity in a more positive sense, we should be focusing on 3 or 4 things that we've actually done well. So in other words, the psychology of learning is it's 3 or 4 to 1. So for instance, today I'm going to reflect on what are 3 things that have gone really well. And you know, it could be to do with work, it could be, you know, I let someone in a traffic queue, or it could be, you know, I got Mary to say something in the workshop. She's never said anything before. I'd be working hard on that. And 1 opportunity. So what's something that I could improve or become better at? And then if we could take this, and you think about this could be a daily cycle, a bit like a cycle that you might have in a huddle meeting, but for yourself. This is like a private 5-10 minutes at the beginning or the end of the day. And out of that, what do I need to update in terms of meaning or KPIs that are meaningful for me? Or what do I need to improve that might be an opportunity? And also, this sets up what are the areas I need to pull support. So what you can see here is we're trying to do how do you get the individual to be more like an adult rather than a child, which actually should join together with the type of servant leadership stuff that many of us are actually trying to achieve. How are we doing on this stuff? Have I lost you, or are you still with me? Yeah, Daniel, you're okay? Stephen, you're okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Good.
Yeah?
Stephen, you're okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. So I'll show you a little bit more where we've gone with some of this stuff. So, so if you're trying to create meaning, this is sort of like blowing this meaning box into more detail. So we started thinking about this, and I've developed a little workshop and exercises around this. So one would be understanding so if I want to be highly motivated, I'm much more likely to be highly motivated if I'm doing stuff that I'm good at, because we all like to do stuff that we're good at. We're going to feel that we've succeeded, etc. So starting by what are my strengths? The second one is, what are some of my personal values that I might have? And what am I passionate about? And obviously some of this might relate more to work and some of it might less. And hence from that, I can start thinking about my personal life goals. So think about what we're doing here. And this might link to some organizational goals of what we're trying to achieve to create a purpose. So purpose here is a bit like your North Star. So the North Star of, I don't know, Abbott Longford is, you know, in 10 years or 20 years to have done whatever it is. This is a bit like, what does that mean for you? What would you like to achieve in your career in a 20-year horizon, or 5 or 10 years, whatever it is? And then coming back from that, what do I need to have done in 2 or 3 years? And then maybe come back to, what do I need to do in a year? So you can see how this is very much like a sort of strategy deployment Hoshin planning. So in other words, what do I need to do this year, which helps you to understand maybe what are the 4 or 5 big things that I need to do, which is a bit like the discontinuous improvement. I don't know, at Abbott, do you still have the balanced scorecard type thing?
Yeah, we do.
So this would be a bit
Yeah,
like a balanced scorecard
Yeah, we do.
so this for yourself, okay? And then the other thing coming out of psychology is we've got to have these goals and purposes. The other thing is we've got to have belief. So there's no point having a goal if we don't think it's possible. You know, I want to be an astronaut and go up and, you know, into space, but it's never going to happen, which is probably what William Shatner thought until a few days ago. You know, did you see he was off, Jim Kirk was beamed up into space? Was he 90 or something? Anyway, but so in other words, if I don't think it's possible, and that belief has to be, I believe it's possible, and also I've got to have belief in the organization and the leaders in this organization that they're going to let me this be possible. So hence, this meaning is around, what am I trying to achieve for myself and for the organization? And what do I believe, and what does the organization believe? And that's about creating meaning. Have I lost you there, or are you still with me? Vaguely, vaguely. Okay. So just to illustrate this, just by way of a little example, I've just sort of made this up just to illustrate it. So let's say I was this organization people value stream, and I was doing this for myself. So I might say some of my strengths might be curiosity, excellence, and persistence. And some of my values might be in knowledge, fairness, and freedom. And obviously we'd all have different things here. I might have a passion in doing research, learning, and writing things. And my organization, if there was such a thing as people value stream, the organization's goal might be that we have a codified way of doing this sort of stuff. So if you take all of that together, a purpose could be the development and sharing of what the value stream approach is about. Is that okay? That's sort of, I mean, very simple example. And I could have a personal belief that the world would be a better place with lean. And an organizational belief in our people value stream organization is the people side of lean is a bit missing. So hence the belief is the world will be a better place with people value stream. So hence meaning could be the widespread approach of this people value stream approach in organizations. Is that okay? You get the idea? I mean, clearly I've not done this in the level of detail that you might do it in reality, but hence you create meaning for the individual in terms of what they might do. So if you do that, what we could start thinking about is on an individual basis, having the equivalent of your huddle boards, but this might be on, you know, a piece of A3, it might be a little something on your PC, it might be a whiteboard that you have at work or next to your desk, or even at home, you might be doing this reflection there. And on that, we might have strategy. So meaning is what's meaningful for me, where do I want to get to, where am I going to be 5 years, 3 years, 1 year? How could I measure that in a way that's meaningful for me? And it could be quantitative, it could be qualitative. the important thing is it's meaningful and motivational for me, not necessarily anyone else, but certainly for me. And what might I need to do in terms of the bigger discontinuous improvement? So this might be, what were the 4 or 5 things that I need to do? Very much like you might have on your improvement plan for a team or for the organization. What are the big things I need to do? So this could be, I've got to get trained on facilitation skills, or I've got to get coaching from my line manager in this, or I've got to go and I don't know, buddy up with someone else in another factory that's very good at this particular knowledge. In other words, what are the big things that are going to flow, that are in my flow to take me forward? And then, so this is a bit like the strategy part of your huddle board. This is a bit like your daily action. So this would be saying, on my metric, am I hitting that metric? And if I'm hitting it as an achievement, or other reflections, in other words, what's gone well today, you know, A, B, and C, you know, whatever it is. So in other words, this is really for me to consolidate that positive feel, etc. And then what might be the 1 or 2 opportunities that come out of this? So in other words, what this is a bit like is the small continuous improvement, where you're looking at your KPIs, you're reflecting on the day. What do I need to do in my next cycle to go forward? So hence, on your board, what do I need to do next? And what support do I need? And hence, the idea here, and this is sort of even slightly before this approach, this idea that we started piloting in a it's actually an R&D facility, of developing these personal boards, personal visual management boards. Now these, what's on the boards isn't quite right, but this was like a first attempt before some of this codification. And what you can see is this actually looks a little bit more like an agile Kanban board. So in other words, we've got various themes. I've got what's in the hopper, what am I doing, what's done, what's the status, you know, what hasn't gone in but I need to think about, how am I going to measure this? And what you can see, these are 2 examples. I could have shown you about 15 or 20. We actually let the individuals have a go themselves and develop it rather than over standardize it. And hence they've done it in slightly different ways. You can see this individual's focused on what they've achieved and best practices and things they've used. But this idea of doing your own personal cockpit, or we actually coined the term tier 0 management, because actually this is for you know, below the tier 1. And hence, if you do that sort of thing, the longer term things we need to develop are probably within these flows. But in terms of time for today, I'm not going to go into sort of huge depth on those flows. I mean, I think you can see they're fairly self-explanatory what they might be, but they're not just about the job, because quite a lot of this creating motivation and value for the individual is about being part of a team, having the autonomy, feeling part of a community, whether that's a work-related team or a non-work related or a social thing after work or in the lunchtime or something like that. And things like, how do we develop the mental health of people, the physical health of people? And obviously things like the mental health is particularly in the fore with a lot of COVID home working and things like that, etc. So this is how Toyota have encompassed this idea of these flows. And we did this in one of our earlier sessions in the network where Stu Brown talked to us. But this is the Bayer room where 3 sites round the room, they're actually looking at the idea of this people value stream. They don't use the term people value stream. How do we recruit? How do we induct people? How do we develop them? What are the behaviors? How are we going to measure them? And how would they do huddles, etc. So this is sort of going round the room, team members, team leaders, going round to group leaders, going round to as senior managers and so forth. So this is this concept of managing this people flow, which links, but actually creates more out of creating this product flow if we can get the people flow right. And hence, there are things that we need to do with HR, which is, for instance, developing this culture that's more adult to adult, much more these managing the flows rather than the silos, for example. And maybe there's different types of value streams here, because we only think of a value stream for a person is you get a job, you get promoted, you get promoted, you get promoted. The problem with that is that you can't all be plant managers. So maybe we've got to find things like Dan Pink used the words, it's no longer about level, it's about mastery. In other words, what people want is to be really good at something. We can't be all good at being the plant manager, but it's what's the one thing or two or three things that would be really good for us that would link to the strengths and passions and so forth. And obviously this will have implications of how we lead, but it's a bit like saying, if we, instead of thinking about how we lead by starting at the organizational level, why don't we start by how do we lead, starting from what the individual wants and what their flows are, and hence what support do they need. So this is about genuinely creating this upside down organization, whereas I think we talk about the upside down organization, many try to do it, but I don't think we're really doing it from the point of view of the individual. I think we're still in the mindset of from the point of view of the organization. And hence the final thing is, if we do some of these things, then perhaps we can get to a more genuine upside down organization. So where we are in this work is, obviously you can see there's lots of ideas and thoughts here. There's two written up papers on this. If you want to see those, we can circulate them. So one is on the people value stream. The second is much more detailed on the psychology than I've gone into. They're really quite in depth. But we're presently going through piloting some of this tier 0 management and this meaning, feeling, reflect, act cycle with 3 organizations. So well, originally it was going to be one person in each, but actually one of the organizations got very excited and we're doing about 10 people in their organization to actually see how this really works, to see if we can get value out of it. But the point being, I think if we can get this right, there is a huge potential to really get after this wasted human potential that we all talk about in our lean and enterprise excellence. But actually focusing on the individual, focusing on the upside down organization, and starting with the individual to meet what we're doing with the leadership, I think there's really something in this that could take us significant steps forward in this sort of missing arena. I'm going to have a breath now. I'd stop. So I'm going to stop there. And you know, we've got a few minutes. If there are questions or clarifications, I'm not sure that made any sense at all, or whether it's just completely gone, you know, flying over everybody's heads, or whatever.
Peter, just maybe a couple of queries.
Yeah.
Certainly an interesting, thought-provoking. In terms of the rollout, right? How do you kind of manage bias? Because maybe the people that are going to get involved initially are the ones that are enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So how do you look to kind of consider how this would work in a real world environment where, you know, it might be difficult to get everybody engaged? Or, and I suppose then my second question was, what would you see almost as a fundamental to rolling this out, or is that something that you're still kind of teasing through? And
Well, I mean, we're sort of quite at the early phases here. So those couple of examples that I just showed you. Like the chalkboard and the whiteboard, etc. Like that was actually. I'm getting an echo here, but they were actually something this one site that's got these 10 people doing this had started to do based on some earlier conversations that we had, and they just went off and had a go at something. And then now we consolidated this, so we're going into sort of second phase. So in their case, this was picked up by the HR team. The HR manager there was really keen, and in their organization, the lean manager for the site reports into HR. So it'd be like, Michael, your boss was the HR manager for the site. So hence lean and HR are one and the same there. So actually it fits together very nicely there. So what they did is they talked about it in the HR team. Everyone in the HR team decided they'd go and have a go. And then they offered the opportunity to other people on the site on a voluntary basis to have a go. And they had about a dozen people who decided to have a go. So that was the early thing that they did. So it was a self-selecting thing. In terms of how you would roll this out, would everyone take part? My guess is you'd never get 100% of people taking part in this. And maybe it would be defeating the object to try and force people to do this, because it would be against the whole ethos of autonomy and, you know, the sort of things. The point is, if you could get half the people to do this, and you could get a lot of benefit with the half of the people, maybe you get a lot of other people wanting to do it. And, you know, one example that comes to mind, and, you know, Joanne, do you remember the personal achievement logs that were at newsprinters? And they had, you know, an A3 thing that said, you know, what have I done to improve? What courses have I done to improve? What is my role for improvement? Which is a bit like a simple recognition for themselves. And it was voluntary, but because nearly everyone did it, and the social pressure was to do it. And, you know, rather than, you know, so it became a sort of self-fulfilling that you actually got lots of people to do it. But I don't have any doubt you'd never get 100% of people doing this. But that doesn't mean to say if it's 50 or 60 or 80% and they get benefit from it, well, why not do it for who wants to get benefit out of it?
No, that's a fair point, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
But I think the other point, Michael, is I don't have the case of a company that's gone, you know, you could be the first. How about that? Sligo rules the world. But okay, thank you. Was there another question, or was that?
No, it was a kind of, yeah, they were kind of linked really. I was just wondering how, yeah, did you think in terms of fundamental, do you think that, say, that you could go into any company and try this, or do you think that there needs to be a certain level of, say, lean awareness or OPEX maturity before you'd look to roll this out?
I think this would work in two types of cases. One is a pretty mature lean organization that sort of understands the sort of things that perhaps we do and we've talked about in this network, that's sort of saying we could go a bit further on the people stuff, but what is it? How could we go a bit further? And this might be something that might take us the next step. Frankly, the number of organizations that are there in the lean journey, I think, is like 2 or 3%. So it's not many. I think the other places this could work might be some people in the HR community in organizations that see the benefit of that, but I think they'd find it very hard to roll it out anywhere apart from in their HR teams. But I think you could see some people, you know, coming from this sort of learning and development actually wanting to do this. And you could see them wanting to try and roll it out as part of personal development planning. The point being, this almost could become the framework for personal development planning, but personal development planning in the eyes of the individual. And then they're pulling support rather than, you know, how many of us go into personal development planning conversations, you know, hating it? You know, the managers don't really want to do it because it's a bit of a waste of time. You know, the associates don't want to do it because it's a tick the box exercise, and, you know, we're going to do the stuff 2 weeks before and two weeks after. Maybe I'm a bit cynical about that, but we've all been there on that sort of thinking, etc. So I don't know. I mean, I think we got to try this stuff out. We got to see how it works. We got to learn from it and fine tune and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, it should be interesting to see it deployed, I suppose. Peter, I think that maybe the rest of the Abbott team can join in here. We have a kind of a development planning tool online, which kind of goes like that in a way that it asks you questions. What's your own personal motivation? What's your own personal goals? And then it comes up and it kind of, so that's interesting. But how is it, I suppose, what's the payback for the employee for doing it is the big thing. Like they're nice tools to have, and HR can say we have them.
Yeah.
But what you really want to see, if an employee takes the trouble to do them, that there's a difference, something will change based on it. And that's probably where we fall down, I would think.
Yeah, I think there's been a big push to get that engaged across the organisation, and they did a good job rolling it out. I think as part of your one-on-one with your team leader, your manager, that you go through your growth plan with them using these tools, and that reinforces it. I think if it comes from leadership down and the expectation is to complete it, because a lot of people, some are motivated and some aren't. So I think by the leadership team as well being engaged in it, it helps. But the functionality is great, and I know personally myself, we always open it up at every one-to-one.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to have the leadership commitment for this sort of stuff. I think the point here is, what I'm trying to get to is that the ownership of this isn't an HR thing. It's the individual that's owning it, and they're doing it because they're creating value for themselves. They're doing it because it's helping them feel good in terms of the achievements, etc. It's helping them in terms of their career and their development. It's helping the short term. So I'm always seeing this, that, you know, you do this daily, and maybe once a week you have a little larger review, much like you might at a huddle board. What are the bigger things? And I'll update my Kanban board maybe once a week or something like that. And then once a month, when I've got more stuff, that can be a focus of what I take into the one-to-one, so people come much more prepared for it. And then the quarterly or the yearly and this sort of thing. So I mean, it sounds like, you know, you've got some good tools that are going in this direction. I think the other angle is here is the lean stuff joining up with the HR stuff, rather than HR trying to peddle this on their own, that we're actually coming from the CI community saying, well, we want to do this. It's not just an HR thing. I suppose that sort of join is where I see there could be some impetus here. But any thoughts for you, Daniel? What about
No, not really.
No.
For me, it's a big and interesting point, specifically when you say the human part in lean is often missing. And that's what I see a lot, or what I wish a lot to increase it, not only in lean, I think in general in management and in companies and organizations. And that's why it's a very interesting topic to me. But there's nothing where I can right now add add to this. It's just
that's fine.
I'm just taking it with me. It's really good.
Okay, good. What about Mark? Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think this whole thing, Peter, with HR and lean is like an interesting topic. Something, let's say, once we get back to hopefully to the norm, we want to push more and you know, getting this this leadership development, and really, you know, with the CI skills, but then obviously the HR skills, and really combining these two departments, and that's you know, all of this. I think it's something which is going to take us to the next level. You know, we have to start thinking beyond. We've got the capabilities of CI with the tools and techniques, and now it's getting into this behavioural side of things. And
so are you making progress with the behavioural work, Mark?
nothing at the moment, Peter, because
Okay.
we're still, obviously, I'm still working from home.
Right.
Still not traveling.
Right. COVID's
So,
hitting you
yeah.
a bit. Yeah.
Yes, very much
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. That's not good, is it? But what about Michelle? Anything from your thoughts for yourself?
I think motivation comes from the employee themselves.
Yeah.
You kind of come across people in work who are disgruntled about different things, about their pay, about their working conditions. But I think core deep down at the start, you need to motivate yourself first,
Yeah.
and create opportunities for
Yeah.
yourself as well, because people aren't going to come and give them to you. So, but it was interested in that pyramid that you had. The employee was at the top and the CEO
Yeah.
was at the bottom. What does that really mean, or what are you saying there, that the employee is going to motivate the whole pyramid? Is it that is upside down, or?
Let me just slip that back on a second. So yeah, this one. So what we were saying here is that in the traditional organization, the CEO at the top has the autonomy. In other words, they make the calls, they make the decisions, etc. And then they really tell people what to do. So they tell them and they tell them, and the people at the bottom of the organization, and you see the language of managers, supervisors, and operators. It's very much this sort of paternalistic, tell people what to do, etc. So the people at the bottom have no autonomy. They're just told what to do, when to do it, and so forth. So they're actually helping the organization, they're supporting them. Whereas here, we're trying to create this high degree of autonomy for the individual. And actually, if you go further on some of the outputs from this sort of meaning that we talked about, there's something called job crafting. And job crafting, it probably is worked more in some of the sort of new age, you know, the sort of Netflixes and Amazon type organizations. So the idea of job crafting is you develop the job around the meaning that you have. This is what I'm good at, this is what I'm strong at, this is what my values are. How do we shape the job? So in terms of three types of shaping the job. So one is the job is the task crafting. So in other words, what tasks do I actually have in my job description? So the point here is the job description is written by the individual rather than by the organization. The second is relationship crafting. So relationship crafting is, who are the people I want to be working with? In other words, where am I going to get my greatest sense of belonging? So to a degree, what team do I want to work within? And I want to work with this person and not this person. And then the third is what's called cognitive crafting. So cognitive crafting is like thinking in a positive way about your role. So, for instance, in the sort of life science, it's, I'm helping patients get better rather than I'm putting stuff in a test tube. It's taking it away from a mundane to actually a bigger purpose, or, I'm helping send people to the moon rather than I'm cleaning the toilets at NASA, etc. So that's cognitive crafting. So obviously there's limits to what you can do with that, but really trying to get as near to that sort of people working it out for themselves. So developing their own work standards, for example. So actually we use language that's much more about the autonomy as much as possible. And obviously there's limits to what, you can't go to utopia on this, of the individual is much more focused, self-reliant, autonomous, etc., much more developing on their own motivation, as you said. And then the role of leaders at all levels is to support the level that they report to them, so that actually the CEO's job is to create the right environment for their team for them, their team for them. So actually we get the highest value out of these people, who actually are the people that are creating value for the organization. Because in organizational terms, everyone in this greener part is probably overhead, and actually the value adding is happening at this frontline level. So that's the idea of the upside down sort of framework.
Thanks for that.
Okay, good. So any other thoughts or comments? Linda, did you ever make it? We see you on the slide, but I don't know if you're there.
We see you on the slide, but
I am here. Whatever it is, my computer doesn't like Zoom because the video
okay.
won't work at all. But no, I did find it very interesting because I was on your last workshop with Toyota and the people value stream in Toyota, where we could actually see their big central area. And I suppose when you can see the visuals in Toyota on their, I don't know, that big area, was it their foyer or
a Bayer room, they call it. Yeah, it's the human. They call it the human capital.
They call it the human capital of Bayer room.
Yeah, and it was interesting just to see. You could really see the people value stream moving through, I suppose, them four walls. That you could see every people's skill set moving to. I found it very interesting, and I suppose as an organisation is going through a lot of, recruitment and growth. I found it very relatable to some issues we're seeing, I suppose, on site at the moment regarding, training and making sure that you're looking after your people in your value stream and not just the material in the value stream all the time.
Yeah.
So actually, I think it's very current right now for what we're seeing.
So the gentleman that presented that was a guy called Stu. And Stu has actually done his own thinking in this meaning space. He's just retired from Toyota after 29 years. He's sort of like 53, 54, something like that. And he's taken a job as a gardener in a care home, which you might think is an extraordinarily strange thing, but it's all around meaning for him and what he wants to get out of life and giving back to some sort of society and this type of thing. So we're actually starting to do some work together, thinking about particularly that role and learning and development, and how that might work, and not in a Toyota environment, because if you've got 3,000 people on a site and there's 2,500 people that are team members, it's easy to see how you can do this in a mass way, but most companies don't look like that. So we're starting to do a bit of thinking about that. So we do brainstorming around my daughter's kitchen table in Derby on that, on A3 pieces of paper.
On A3 pieces of paper.
Wonderful. She must be delighted to see you coming.
Well, no, the deal is she gets a free lunch.
She gets a free lunch.
Oh, wonderful.
Which is all very good. Okay, good.
Good.
Stephen, did you want to share a thought?
I always think anything visual starts the conversation anyway. Visual management, I think, is one of the most powerful tools in Lean anyway. And I think when it's done right, it always starts that conversation. So even if you were to implement that with one or two people, if it's seen visually, it will drive people to look at it and will drive that engagement for other people to start following as well. I think it's one of the most powerful tools.
Yeah, I think people will be interested if you start putting them up. The only thing about putting them up is there may be stuff that you don't want to necessarily share.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you'd have to give that autonomy to people, saying, well, you might want to keep this, on a piece of paper, a book, on your laptop, or even at home. There might be. So one of our case study that we're doing, the one of is a lady, and her life goal is actually to become a dog breeder, a dog trainer, and actually she sees a route to that being moving from CI into more learning and development role, which is about learning and development, and then transferring that knowledge as a sort of semi-retirement thing or retirement thing into dog training. Now, whether you'd want to put that on your wall next to you in work, not necessarily, but it helps her in making clarity of some of the things she wants to do to get the most out of her life and so forth. So I think there you'd give people a choice. And I think the other thing is, if they're asking for support, they have to decide what they want to ask for support in and from whom, because it may be that the relationship with the line manager is not the right person. It might be a buddy or even someone outside of work or whatever that can support them. So I think as visual as possible would be the as the point. Good. Okay, anything else, or are we gonna I'll make it 1 minute to 4, and we said we go through till 4.
Thanks, Peter. I must leave anyway. Appreciate it. Thank you. Very interesting.
Do you want us to send those papers around?
Yes, please.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I mean, bear in mind they're written for an academic audience, so you know they're not. You may think this was heavy today, but they're heavier than this. You know, references and all that. So I mean, if you want to quote any of this stuff, you know, Stephen and Joanne, in your master's work, there's lots of references and stuff in there for you. So I'll drop those through, or Emma will drop those through with the reference and so forth.
Okay.
Grand. All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.